Captive Treasure, Chapter 1, The Jumping Off Point. St. Joe, dead ahead! The River Queen's whistle shrilled, and her huge paddle wheels churned the water. Carrie Talbot ran back and forth on the crowded deck of the steamer. Nowhere could she find an empty place at the rail. She tried climbing up on a keg so that she could see over the heads of the people, but tall hats and wide bonnets blocked everything except the bright blue of the summer sky. She tried scrunching down low to see between the rails, but tall boots and wide skirts blocked everything except the dirty brown of the river water. Suddenly, strong hands clasped her around the waist and scooped her up. Her surprised shriek turned to laughter when she looked into her father's eyes. He took off his hat and swung her up to his broad shoulders. Carrie clutched at his head as her long legs dangled. "You're not quite grown up yet, I see," he teased. "Hold on tight now, I might drop you." He braced his feet on the deck. Carrie's brown eyes sparkled with excitement. She swung her coppery braids out of the way and leaned forward. The steamer eased around the bend. A great shout rose from the watching passengers. "St. Joe!" "St. Joe," Carrie repeated eagerly. "The jumping off place. And the first step west." Carrie barely heard her mother's quiet voice, but she felt her father shift position. She glanced down and saw him put his free arm around his wife. Carrie wiggled down to stand with them. Dimly she realized that their excitement was as great as her own. Another immigrant turned to smile at them. "I see you're as eager as the rest of us, preacher." Nathan Talbot nodded. "My brother wrote that I was needed," he replied. "He established a mission out west. The Lord has truly blessed his work with the Indians." "I wish you well, then," the immigrant replied slowly. "Not all have fared as well with the Indians." The man left to join his family at the rail. Martha Talbot stared after him. She reached for Carrie. Absent-mindedly she smoothed the fiery strands that refused to stay in Carrie's thick braids. "Don't mind him, Ma," Carrie said cheerfully. "God will take care of us, just like he always has. Right, Pa?" A smile lit Mrs. Talbot's face as her husband's firm "Amen" rolled over the noise of the crowd. "I know, child," she said gently. She gave Carrie's hair one last pat and let her go. The deck shuddered under their feet as the engine reversed. The crowd shifted. A space at the rail opened up. Carrie darted forward and squeezed in. She clutched the rail and stared at the busy wharf on the bank. The wharf was crowded with goods and scurrying people. Empty supply wagons lined the bank above it. The drivers tried to quiet their restless mules as they waited to load their wagons. On the dock, waiting passengers got in the way of the dock hands. A few children clutched tightly to their mothers' hands. Others ran wildly about, shouting in excitement. Yelping dogs added to their clamor to the shouts of the workers. Another shuddering bump and the boat docked. The gangplank slowly creaked down. The crowd surged forward. Most of the passengers hurried across the wharf to the dirt road that led into the rough town of St. Joseph, Missouri. Carrie shifted from one foot to the other as the folds of a full cape swept across her face. Impatience tugged at her. It urged her to join the crowd and to hurry into the exciting bustle below. Common sense told her to stay put. For once, Carrie obeyed the voice of caution. She waited until the crowd thinned. Then she saw her mother waiting by the gangplank, a worried expression on her face. "Here, Ma!" Carrie shouted. The usual smile swept across her mother's face as Carrie hurried forward. "Carrie," she scolded lightly, "you could have been swept overboard." "Not the way she was holding on," Mr. Talbot said. "Not a moment's worry, Martha. We can count on Carrie to keep her head on straight." Carrie giggled. Her father had never let her forget the time she had overheard two women talking about a disorganized traveling salesman. She had spent weeks watching the salesman. Not once did she catch him when he didn't have his head on straight, as the women had said. The Talbots picked up their bags and made their way down the gangplank. Mr. Talbot led the way past bales of cotton and huge crates of furniture. At the edge of the dock he helped both Carrie and her mother up onto the wooden boardwalk. Carrie half walked, half skipped ahead of her father and mother. Her eyes darted everywhere, trying to see as much as possible. The sidewalk was almost as crowded as the rail of the River Queen. The stores were crowded with men, women, and children. The dirt streets were packed with prairie schooners, buckboards, and freight wagons. "So many," Mrs. Talbot said in amazement. "I just didn't realize there would be so many people going west." "It's that time of year," Mr. Talbot answered. "The spring thaw brought fresh green grass across the prairie. The grass will feed the oxen on the way, and it's safer to travel in large numbers. We'll find a wagon train and join it." Mrs. Talbot touched her purse. I have the list of things we need from the general store. You go ahead and locate some of the things, Martha. I'll head for the blacksmith to get a team and a wagon." He turned to Carrie. "You help your mother, Carrie." "Yes, Pa," Carrie said. Mrs. Talbot stopped at a store. The sign painted on the window promised that all their traveling needs could be taken care of inside. "Coming from the east," Carrie read out loud. "Going to the west? Come on in, give your feet a rest." Carrie looked at her mother and they both laughed. "Well, this ought to do," Martha Talbot said. "Come, Carrie, we've some serious shopping to do." Carrie followed her mother into the store. After an hour or so she grew tired of paper and pins, pots and pans. She sat down on a barrel and swung her feet. Her eyes sparkled with interest as she watched the customers in the store. After a few moments she felt a tug at her foot. She looked down. A crawling baby pulled at her skirt. Carrie picked him up and held him in her lap. She laughed as he pulled at her bonnet strings. His gurgling reply brought a woman through the crowd. "There you are, Joseph Edward," she said in an anxious voice. "I'm so sorry. I just can't keep my eyes on them all and hunt for what I need, too." Mrs. Talbot turned. When she saw the baby in Carrie's lap, she smiled. "Carrie will take care of him while you make your purchases," she said. "Don't fret now. She's very good with the little ones." "Oh, thank you," the woman said in relief. "I won't be much longer." She made her way back to the counter. Carrie tickled the baby's fat chin. His laugh was like running water. She played with him for a while. Before long the baby began to squirm to get down. Carrie got up to walk him around the store. A tall boy shoved his way through the crowd. He bumped into Carrie. He was about to push past her when he saw the baby. He frowned. "Just what are you doing with Joseph Edward?" he demanded. Carrie's eyebrows drew together in a frown as dark as the boy's. An angry reply flew to her tongue. Before the sharp words could come out, she took a deep breath. Her answer came in a perfect copy of her mother's quiet tone. "I'm taking care of him for the woman over there." "He's my brother. I'll take him." The boy took the baby so quickly that Joseph Edward whimpered. Then the boy thrust his way through the people to the woman at the counter. He spoke so sharply that Carrie had heard him clearly. "Pa didn't buy the horse. He bought another team of oxen instead." His mother's reply was lost in a shout from outside. Carrie saw the boy hand the baby to his mother and stalk away. Two white-headed girls about Carrie's age hurried through the door. They went straight to the counter. One took the baby as the woman paid for her purchases. The woman had not bought much. She gathered up the one small package. Holding on to the two girls beside her, she wended her way back to Carrie. The tow-headed girls gave Carrie shy grins. "Thank you, honey," the woman said breathlessly. "You're a right smart girl to be as young as you are." "Thank you," Carrie said. She stood up and held herself tall as her mother approached. "Well, you surely did a fine job with Joseph Edward. I would never have finished without you," the woman said warmly. "I think this is the last of it. It'll have to be. We leave in a few days." Mrs. Talbot stopped beside Carrie. "I'm Martha Talbot, and this is my daughter Carrie," she said. "We just came in on the boat." "Glad to meet you. I'm Emma Gance," the woman replied. "We came overland a week ago." "Which train are you with?" Mrs. Talbot asked. "The Thaddler wagons," Mrs. Gance replied. "It's a good train. Mr. Thaddler hired an experienced wagon master. We expect a good crossing." "Is it full? Could it handle one more?" "Why, yes," Mrs. Gance said. "A family turned back yesterday. The wife was sick. You might take their place." "I'll tell my husband," Mrs. Talbot said. "If he hasn't found another place, perhaps we'll see you again." The woman nodded and hurried out. Carrie watched the children following her and smiled. It would be fun to play with the children on the long trip. She wondered if the oldest girl was her age. Then her frown returned as she remembered the rude boy. He would not be fun at all.